dirt road off a 2-lane past a shot up county sign. Squeaking of a backyard screen door letting you know that it's
The Putnam Personalities podcast exists to highlight the good, the positive, and the inspirational in our community. This episode is not an endorsement of any political or religious ideology. This podcast is a simple interview to get to know our friends, neighbors, leaders, and colleagues on a more personal level. Sit back, grab some sweet tea, and enjoy today's interview.
like home to me.
I'm excited to have Mr. Bob Lee on the podcast this morning, the Putnam Personalities podcast. And you're one of the gentlemen that I have I have a list of about 50 people in our community, and you're on that list. And the reason why is, one, I like to read. I have a library, and I found one of your books one day and purchased it. And I actually have the copy of the book here. In fact, I just started reading it and knowing that you're coming on the show. So I've been writing some questions down, excited you're coming. But weekends are my busy. I'm a pastor, so weekends are my busy time. Sure. And so I've been cramming this book since my last interview to get it done. And I'm excited. So last night, after a long day, I was reading. I got really tired. So I'm gonna go sit in the tub and try to catch some more. I was not feeling the greatest. And
you dropped
I'm embarrassed to tell you that I was at the end of chapter 15 and I dozed off and I dropped the book in the bathtub. So I'm sorry for the mental image, but I showed you this morning.
That's okay. But not to worry, guys. We've got a replacement.
So you brought me a replacement. So
indeed I did. So.
But yeah, I bought this at Chamblin, and I bought I paid a little extra for it because it was autographed right there in 2017. But anyway, so I've been reading your book. I'm excited, but let's do this. Let's talk about, you have a lot of stuff you brought with you. So let's talk about your books first. Let's talk about your first book last, because I have questions about things I read, good things.
Yes.
So before we do that, what's your second book? That was
Well, first let me just say I am delighted to be here with Putnam Personalities, and I want to thank you for inviting me to be on, because I'm all about anything regarding Putnam County. So I'm just pleased to be here. So
treat it like this. Like, to me, my podcast is simply a conversation between two people. And I said it's like we're at a coffee shop, people are eavesdropping, so it's just a conversation, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I do.
Well, sometimes I'm kind of used to looking at the camera, so I don't know.
That's okay. That's no big deal.
So we'll go to the second book.
Okay.
So the second book is Bad Guys, Bullets, and Boat Chases. This came out in March of 2017. It's published by the University Press of Florida. And in this particular book, it's a little different than my first book, Backcountry Lawman, in that I put on my journalism cap, and I spent 3 years interviewing working and retired officers, wildlife officers, or game wardens, as they're more locally known here, from one end of Florida to the other. So it covers all of Peninsula Florida, from Live Oak to the Everglades to the big cattle ranches west of Lake Okeechobee to Big Pine Island and Matlacha Pass in southwest Florida, Kissimmee River Marsh, Lake Apopka, a couple of stories in Volusia, 4 here in Putnam, and then we jump back up to around Horseshoe Beach. So
when you say Pine Island, where's Pine Island?
Pine Island is down
the Hudson,
down
Wiki Watchie?
No. Pine Island is in southwest Florida, and where Matlacha Pass is, I think it's near Fort Myers. So
there's a Pine Island near Wiki Watchie. That's where my family used to go to the beach all the time.
And there's another one up near St. Augustine too. So it can be very confusing. Absolutely. So and so these particular stories in Bad Guys, Bullets, and Boat Chases, a lot of them are very dramatic. They are third person, whereas in Backcountry Lawman, all of those are first person.
Those are personal. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I say it's more of a journalistic effort. And when I say I interviewed people, I did recorded interviews, transcribe them. Then I would take the nuggets from those interviews and I weave them into the stories I tell. And if there's arrest summaries, if there's videos of suspects having been interviewed, I would have looked at all of those as well. Okay, so put a lot of effort into it. But when I say dramatic, to give you an example, the first chapter in Bad Guys, Bullets, and Boat Chases is the crash of Flight 401. Flight 401 crashed on December 29th, 1972 at 11:42 p.m. in the Everglades. At the time, it was the first jumbo jet to crash and the worst aviation disaster in U.S. history. It is a heck of a story. And I tell it from the point of view of a 2-month rookie game warden who's in the Everglades alone at night on patrol looking for deer poachers. And then he sees the plane crash from 25 miles away. He didn't really realize what it was, but in his words, it looked like somebody had poured gasoline on a campfire, and it flared up, and then about 10 or 15 minutes later, he got the call, and he worked survivor and body recovery for the next 3 days. Wow. And so also interviewed a passenger and a stewardess who survived and examined the crash reports. So it's probably one of the best stories in the book, I think, and quite obviously dramatic. So
yeah, biographies are fun to read. I enjoy a lot of biographies, but I really love an autobiography, which I'm getting ahead of myself. So wait on that one. Let's go to this book real quick.
So yeah,
this is your newest book.
So this is my most recent effort. It's entitled Bones and Water. Came out just a couple of months ago. It is my third book, my first novel, and the best way I can sum it up, I think of it as a contemporary murder thriller set on the St. Johns River and nearby locales in northeast Florida. So from my earlier experiences, having spent 13 years patrolling the St. Johns River, thousands of patrols day and night, and in the Ocklawaha River, I know this area well, and it just seemed like, as a novelist, where am I going to put the backdrop? Well, kind of logically, I don't have to research anything. I'll put it right here. Right. And there are some chapters that take place over near Marineland where I have a fictional research lab there. But for the most part, it's all South Putnam. And I think folks would recognize a lot of the terrain and the water courses I talk about. There is one fictional creek called Cades Creek. Other than that, everything is real.
Okay. That's pretty awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Now this is your third book. So that brings us to your very first book, which I'm excited about because I'm reading it. Sure. And it's autobiographical, I guess you could say.
Correct.
They're firsthand stories. And there's a lot. I jot stuff down because I've never, honestly, as a pastor, normally my books are about pastors or missionaries. So to read something that was but reading it was awesome because I'm seeing things that I know, like Rice Creek. I'm seeing names of roads and bridges and things. I'm like, I'm like, hey, I know all these things. So it kind of gives a little more appreciation in our area. But in that, just a few things. It was printed in 2013. You talk in a few chapters about monkey fishing.
Correct.
So let's talk about that for a minute. What is monkey fishing?
Now that you mentioned it.
Yes. Surprise.
Well, it's a favorite topic of a lot of folks in Putnam County too, particularly, the old timers, those who go back several generations. So monkey fishing is kind of the lingo of the outlaw commercial fishermen here in Putnam County, particularly probably originated back around the late 50s and then 60s, 70s and to the mid 80s. It was fairly prevalent. And it's a way of illegally shocking freshwater catfish. And so this is one of the original devices. I actually recovered this after a boat chase in the Ocklawaha River one night at about 3 a.m. I had the bad guys threw it overboard. I threw a marker buoy on top of it. And after the chase was all done and all the excitement, I came back and I went to my marker buoy. And here's what's really neat. You can almost, since you're a pastor, we could call this divine intervention. You see this little knot right here? Mm-hmm. Well, this is typically where they would put a spark plug to weight it. And this is one of the wires that would help generate the electricity. But anyway, when I threw the trap drag over, trap drag has 4 tines on it. One of the tines hooked it the first throw. And I brought it up and I had the wire. I couldn't believe it because these things, you normally can't drag them up. I got to send a diver now.
Right. And
I brought the whole device up. But how it works is, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but there's a motor here, there's a magneto here, and there's a shaft that connects from the motor to the magneto. 2 wires go from the motor to a very large battery in the boat, and there's a toggle switch Right
Okay.
here, you can click that toggle switch to turn it on. And so the motor turns the generator, which generates a very high amperage. I am not an electrician, so I can't really explain that to you except to say that it does generate a charge. And two wires from the magneto will be dropped over either side of the boat, weighted typically by a spark plug with the copper tips peeled back, and that generates an electric charge. Well, it only works on freshwater. It only works on catfish. It does not work on a scaled fish like a brim or a largemouth bass, and the reason why is just not powerful enough.
But does it shock the fish? Or
Yes,
does it warm the water?
it shocks the fish. It stings them.
Okay.
And so the fish obviously want to escape, so they come up to the surface, and then they'll skitter around on top.
Okay.
And so then while they're on top and about half numb or stunned, maybe a better way to put it, then the commercial fishermen will use a long-handled dip net, typically 12 to 14 feet in length, to scoop them back into the boat. Now, they do not use the underhand method like you would typically use with a landing net if you were fishing and you had a bass and you did this. It's an overhand. It's like you're raking leaves in your yard. They'll pull it in, and then the catfish tines, it's a webbing, and the catfish tines will typically get caught up in that webbing, so they'll have to hammer it and knock it in the boat and knock the fish out of it, and then they'll go back. A two-man crew who really knows what they're doing can catch 600 pounds of fish in 4 hours.
600 pounds, yeah.
Yeah, and it only works in the summertime when the water temperature is above 70 degrees. I don't really understand why, but that's how it is. So it was only a summertime kind of poaching, if you will, right?
Okay.
It's seasonal, right?
Cool.
So
that's pretty neat. Yeah, and it's called. And
oh, wait a minute. Let me get back. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to go back to where the term originates or how it terms, right? So that's where you're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
So monkey fishing, the term when it first began, there was no motor to turn the magneto. They had an old hand crank magneto off an antique telephone,
right,
and it was mounted on a board. So one guy would be in the boat furiously cranking it, and then the other guy would be running back and forth, netting these fish, right? So some people kind of thought it resembled the old 18th, 19th century organ grinder standing on a London street corner cranking the organ, and then you got the monkey with the tin cup begging for the pennies. Right. And so that's how the term originated. Now in other states, it's referred to as telephoning. Because a lot of the magnetos, this one did not come from an antique telephone, and I write about it in the book, The Most Notorious Poacher in Putnam County was Roger Gunner. And he, in the numerous discussions I've had with him, he told me he would get the antique telephone magazines, and he would order 10 magnetos at a time. And then he'd make the machines up, and then he stashed them in different places all up and down the river in a military ammo can, because that kept it dry.
Now I'm assuming, like we say past, but I'm sure people still have something they do today, right? Something similar?
There are a few cases made now up in West Florida. There's a few counties that they use them, but now they got a much more modern device that maybe is about yay big, and that you can buy off the internet, because in some states, it's my understanding, it is legal.
Okay. It's
illegal in Florida. Okay. So you can have a device that would probably fit in your pocket. Okay. And of course, you still have to have the wires going over the boat, right? But it's much smaller than this homemade monkey machine that you see here. But so this was fairly ubiquitous. I mean, there was a lot of it going on when I first started, and what's kind of interesting, and there was when you went to try to catch them, and typically it's at night, not always, but there's always a boat chase, and it would be like a hell bent for leather boat chase, because they have a small boat, big engine. We'd have a reasonably small boat, large engine, and that went on like that because at the time when I first came here in 1977. There was no law about fleeing and attempting to elude a police officer on the water. It was on land. So you have a boat chase, charge them. Right? Except this violation, but then you got to get it off the bottom, because they're always going to throw it.
Right.
and it weighs about 10 pounds. I mean, it sinks like the proverbial rock, right? So then in 1981, the first law was passed about fleeing and attempting to elude on water. It was a misdemeanor. By 1987, there have been several amendments. And by that time, in 87, it became a third-degree felony and also provided for forfeiture of the vessel, regardless of whatever the crime is committed. And so when that happened, a lot of this nonsense stopped.
Right.
And you don't really have a lot of boat chases anymore, except what I write about here in this book. There's one chapter where a boat chase takes place with outlaw pompano fishermen down in southwest Florida, around what they call Big Pine Island and Matlacha Pass. And the pompano, it's a marine species of fish, a saltwater finfish. They're so valuable that even though it's a third-degree felony to use a gill net or to flee, they'll risk it all for the pompano. And I found that to be a fascinating story because you've got two rookie game wardens that are just starting out and they're locking horns with a professional outlaw who's been raised and knows the waters like the back of his hand.
That's cool. So you almost joined the GFC, and I read that. What does GFC mean?
So the GFC, so I did, when I first began, it was the Game and Freshwater Fish Commission.
Okay.
And so that organization began around 1942 and also was a constitutional authority, which means the Game and Freshwater Fishing Commission has the right to, there's a committee that meets to decide the laws. We can make our own laws about the protection of freshwater fish and wildlife. Can't make any other law. Okay, you can't make any law about burger or anything like that. That's in the Florida state statutes, right? So it made us kind of autonomous, and the good thing about that was that constitutional authority, special interest groups couldn't sway the legislatures about, we don't want this law. Whereas at the same time, our sister agency was the Florida Marine Patrol on the saltwater side. They did not have that. And so when they had to go to the legislature to get their laws passed. And a lot of times those legislatures were being swayed by the commercial fishing lobby. They were.
Okay.
And so they realized that there was a real problem with that. And there was a big push in the 90s to get the two agencies to merge. And it went to the vote of the people, a referendum, and 72% voted for the merger. So in July 1st, 1999, these two agencies were merged to form this one big, huge, mega conservation law enforcement agency that is now known as the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. At the time of the merger, when they combined the air forces of the two, we had more airplanes and helicopters than any law enforcement agency in the United States, including New York City.
In the state of Florida?
In the state of Florida. We had more than any other law enforcement. Now, obviously, we didn't have a need for that many aircraft, so they were sold off,
right?
And thinned down. But
that's interesting. And then, I noticed that you graduated with a BA Criminal Justice from USF, and then I had to go back this morning and find the story. So David Gaines was a Hillsborough County.
Correct. He was a wildlife officer in Hillsborough County.
All right, and there's a story about some blonde girls giving the phone number on the window going down 75. And I have to tell you a story that happened to me that was very similar, almost in the same area, which I thought was interesting. So back then, when I was in probably college age, so that had been 97, 96 time period, 95 time period, I came home and I'm driving down the highway, 75, and I see a bumper sticker that says Charlie Crist. And at the time, he was running for, I forget what he was at the time, but of course he became governor later. Anyway, so I'm going down 75, and I pull up next to Charlie Crist, and for some reason I just happen to beep and wave at him, and he pulled his car closer to mine, and he hands me a bumper sticker while we're driving down.
No kidding.
Kid you not? While we're driving down 75, he pulls over and he reaches out and hands me a bumper sticker.
He's a true politician.
I was like, so anyway, when I read that story about the girls giving a phone number on the window, I'm like, that's some weird stuff happens on 75 with communication.
Well, I was kind of gobsmacked, but David Gaines, he looked like he walked out of GQ magazine. He looked like a Hollywood movie star,
Right.
and the women loved him. And so they did. They saw him. They come by in a Corvette. But when we used to go to the courthouses to file his cases, I would go with him because I was interning with him as well as half a dozen other officers in the Hillsborough County and Pasco County area. He'd have to go and visit every secretary. They loved him. The women loved him. So anyway.
That's why you had to write down the phone number because he was driving, right?
Yes, I had to write down the phone number. Of course, hey, I'm trying to get along, right? I'm an intern. I said, I want everybody to, yeah, okay, here, David, here's these ladies.
You mentioned in the book about net and gear design, and then there's specification compliances. How often do they update? Is there a lot? Is that something that is an ongoing thing? Are they constantly changing things?
It does change. Yeah. So, and of course, I'm not up on it now, but I think I think you may be referring to hoop nets because I do write about hoop nets on a couple of chapters of Backcountry Lawman. So, for your viewers who don't know what a hoop net is, it's kind of like a wire fish trap. It's a two funnel design, which most fish traps are typically made of. But in this particular case, the hoop net is far more efficient than a wire fish trap. A wire fish trap will stand, they'll stand about like this, and they'll be about that big around, have two funnels, but you cannot collapse it. It's made out of wire like chicken wire, right? Mm-hmm. But it's coated so it won't corrode. And it has a door where you can put in the bait. It has another door where you can empty the fish out. But the hoop net is made out of webbing and 4 fiberglass hoops. And they can go from 3 feet in diameter up to 5 feet, even 6 feet max. And they will be in length once you spread them out. They kind of open up like an accordion. You stretch them, they'll be 12 to 14 feet long. So it's a large device. And they're anchored with lines that come off of each end. And you'll have two cinder blocks, or somebody or the fisherman might take a piece of rebar, and they have a tool, they ram it into the bottom, and that's what they use to stake those ends out to tie them off. And then there's a zipper where you can put in soybean cake. Typically, that was one of the baits. Mm-hmm. And then there's and also there's that zipper you can empty the fish out. But a hoop net can catch up to 150 to 200 pounds of catfish.
So if you're going out to a yard sale and you're buying some, I guess the reason I was thinking of this, if you're going to a yard sale and you're buying somebody's used fishing equipment, it's possible that some of that stuff could be not even legal anymore.
Well, the hoop nets, okay, so the hoop nets can only be fished with a commercial freshwater fishing license. Okay. And you're allowed, I haven't looked at the rules in a long time, but back when I was working, you're allowed to fish 100 on your license. Now, 100 hoop nets, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
And it's also a lot of work. It's backbreaking. And typically, these commercial fishermen, there would be a team of 2 to work them. Because if it's got a load of fish, you've got to bend over and you've got to roll it up onto the boat. And so it really gets you in the back. And over a period of time, even though this webbing was tarred, they'll collect a lot of algae. And it becomes, the net itself that algae can add 150, 200 pounds to the net. So periodically they'd have to pull the nets, clean them, and they spray them with Clorox, and then they'd have a big vat. They'd drop it in it and retar, let them dry, and then they put them back out.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I was actually, yesterday morning, gave an illustration in our message about, I was on a boat a few years ago with a friend who was contracted to get the gizzard shad.
Gizzard shad. Oh, what a nasty fish.
And 600, the nets are like somewhere 600 yards long,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken.
They're big gill nets.
And one man pulling that thing in, oh my goodness, watching him pull, throw out the good stuff, and which was sad because he's grabbing stuff that, is wanted fish, but he has to throw them back in.
Now, did you go out in the boat with him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. That was out in Crescent.
Yeah. How about the smell of this gizzard shad?
It was horrible. And they're kind of a useless fish, from what I understand.
Well, they do grind them up and use them for fertilizer.
I guess they send some
and the
to
bait for the crabbers,
for
the blue crab fishermen. Yes.
Yeah, or that and the crawfish. I guess they send some to Louisiana as well. Mm-hmm. But I guess some people somewhere in Asia do eat them or something. So there's.
I got to tell you, I wouldn't. I mean, the odor. I mean, gosh, if you catch one that's slime, and it's the only fish I think it rots before it dies. I mean, it's just nasty. And then after it dies, then you really
one of their nickname, I think, is the slime shad or something like that. But yeah, this guy, of course, when you're pulling him in, he had buckets, and he's, the goal was to pull out as much as you could, because I guess they're adding to.
They're filter feeders.
Yeah,
and they help remove the that blue-green algae, and they're also using gill nets in Lake Apopka, because Lake Apopka, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but that's the fourth largest lake in Florida, 32,000 acres, but it had become so polluted, all the fish had died, and that it just thick with this algae, right? So they are allowed to go in there and run gill nets. They're supervised. There's a man named Steve Miller. I know him very well. He's a fisheries biologist with St. Johns River Water Management, and he's the one who oversees that fishery on Lake Apopka and on Lake George too, which you may have gone with your friend.
The other one was, that's where it was. Yeah, no, it wasn't Crescent. It was Lake George.
Lake George, right.
Lake George.
Right. And so Steve Miller oversees that operation as well. And, but anyway, so by removing these fish, it helps to remove, because they're filter feeders, it helps them remove that algae out of there and kind of clean the lake up. And now Lake Apopka, speckled perch are starting to come back, and so it's looking a lot healthier.
Yeah, so Noonan Lake is another one that had that same Noonan Lake over in Gainesville. Yeah, what happened was, just to clear, we were at Crescent Lake, and we were on a boat, and a friend of ours was pulling up the crab traps and doing that, and then he got a call from his dad, said, I have an emergency over here at Lake George. So we went back, jumped in the truck, went down to Lake George, and that's how, So I was at Crescent, and we went over to Lake George, and that's where he was pulling. And I was like, that's a huge net. And just to see all the fish he was pulling, it was crazy.
And it's a lot of work. And obviously there's a skill to getting those fish out of that webbing.
Yeah, it was interesting. What's a transom?
A transom.
I should have Googled that, but I didn't. It's part of a boat.
Well, a transom would be the stern of the boat.
Okay.
It's that block of wood. It's what the outboard motor strapped onto.
Okay. Yeah, I should have looked that up, and I was reading the one where you were in the sinking boat, and and by the way, I really just, I'm not trying to kiss butt, but I really enjoyed your writing.
Thank you.
I actually was trying to go back this morning. There was a couple paragraphs I read that were really that grabbed my attention. But hearing the story about when, you're trying to just to see what's going on at night, and you kind of turn everything off, the next thing you realize, you're like, everything is starting to get black, and you're like, I think I'm sinking, that whole story. And that's where the word transom came up at first. And I was looking at that, running over Vernon Bennett. So this is an interesting thing too. So it's, I love how you said you thought there could be a lawsuit. Is there not is Vernon, I don't know if Vernon's still alive or not. But
Vernon has passed.
Has he passed? But some of the stories you tell, it'd be like, can they not come back and, eventually sue you for something that you're admitting to in a book?
Well,
or is there a certain time period?
Probably not. Okay. Probably not. I mean, if it was going to happen, it was considered at the time. Now, if that were to happen now, I can almost promise you there would have been a lawsuit. There would have been.
So,
but I've got a story to tell on that, in addition to running over Vernon. So the book comes out, The Backcountry Lawman comes out, and I mean, people in Putnam County, they're just all about it because I changed the names of everybody in it except for Vernon and Roger Gunner. Everybody else has a fictitious name, but as it turns out, a lot of the folks wanted to see themselves in the book. It was insane, right? So, but anyway,
is Vernon still alive?
No.
Okay.
No.
Oh wait, no, that's not Vernon. The one you just said before, the Roger.
Roger is, yes, he is.
Okay.
Yes, and he lives out toward Deep Creek on 310. Okay. But anyway,
that's cool.
So I get a phone shortly after the book comes out. I get a phone call, and oh gosh, what's her name? It's the granddaughter of Vernon Bennett. Maybe it'll come to him, but anyway, it's the granddaughter. She calls me up. She says, gives me her name, and I pause because this is either going to go really bad, or it's because I've written about me running over her grandfather, right,
on a boat,
or it's going to go really good, and I'm just waiting for it. And she says, I want you to know, I love the story you wrote about my grandfather. And I want you to also know, I used to go out there with him at night. And then she started telling me all the stuff that I never knew. And he had maps at the house. And she said he had all his illegal gear mapped out. And she started, well, these wonderful stories she was sharing with me, so it was like old home week for us, and she appreciated it, because I try not to write. I was very careful about how I wrote about the commercial fishermen. I don't portray them in a bad light. I just portray it how it is. Right.
Well, you actually.
I mean, they're not serial killers. So, I mean,
it
we have
seems
to
like at the end there, you actually like the one guy I was reading about this morning, the ones that shot the turkeys out in Barton. You're like, afterwards, you all sat down and had sweet tea.
Right.
I mean, so it's like,
right.
They knew you had a job to do, but then you realize, like you said, they're not, axe murderers. They're doing something illegal. You bring it to their attention.
Yeah. So that kind of reminds me of the first time I had a boat chase. I'm going to try to shorten this story way down, but was with a monkey fisherman in south end of Crescent Lake. I had worked all night on this guy. I had stalked him, and finally I came in behind him, and we had us a boat chase. And it's an open water chase, so it's not that exciting, but it's a boat chase. And eventually I overpower him, and he stops. And I am very excited. I'm 24, and so, but there's no law. And this device is not in the boat. They threw it. I didn't even see him throw it.
Right.
That's how good they were.
Right.
And so, and I just railed away at him. I said some things I shouldn't have said because I'm young, and they just, there's two of them there, and they're dressed typically blue jeans, white t-shirt, soaked from the dew, because this is summertime, and they got white rubber boots. And both of them were just kind of hanging their heads, and they're just taking it. And finally, I ran out of breath and paused for a second. So one of them, the leader, he looks up at me and says, "Bob, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Let me explain to you how things work." He said, "I've had a lot of boat chases. I've had a lot of experience with game wardens." He said, "Sometimes you win, and sometimes we win. It's just how it is." He said, "Here, I've got something that's going to make you feel better." He reaches in a cooler and he pulls out a chicken salad sandwich. "Here, take this. My wife just made it. It's delicious." And I got a cup of coffee. And by that time, I thought my head was going to explode. I just couldn't. And they were just so cool, So anyway.
You tell that story in here, right?
I don't know if I do or not. I don't think
you talk about the chicken salad. I remember the chicken sandwich story.
Well, maybe I do. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've looked at it. But in any case, I went off in a huff. And so I went home and I reflected on that experience, processed it. And I said to myself, well, okay, if this is how it's done, there's no sense getting excited about it. And that's kind of the attitude I tried to have, because there's a lot of misses. You miss a lot more than you catch. And it can eat you up with frustration because you try really, really hard. But after a while, if you miss one, timing's off, somebody gets away, there's always tomorrow night. And I just tried, that's the attitude I have, because it can be very frustrating.
I like that about the book too. You're not the hero every time. Like there's failures and stuff. That's good too.
Well, here's what I found out. And I decided earlier on that when writing this book, people really don't want to know when things go right. They want to know when things go wrong. And so I can afford to point the finger at myself, because I've got 17 chapters in that book. I think it's 17. Or I'm getting confused between this one. Maybe that's 24. 24 in the first one. So then I have some chapters where things do go wrong. They do go correct, because you don't want to make a total fool out of yourself. But in that way, though, I think I have a little self-deprecating humor in there, I hope. I show that.
Yeah.
So it makes it a little.
That's what I said. I was excited to meet you this morning, just because I've been reading the book. I'm like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it makes it kind of hopefully more of a fun read.
So when's the last time you talked to Gator Banks?
Gator and I keep up with each other. He probably talked to him on the phone maybe 6 weeks ago. We had dinner, he and his wife, and my wife, maybe 6 months ago.
I Googled him. I guess he lives in, he's in Hiawassee now?
He sold that. He is in St. Augustine full-time now.
Okay. Yeah, he's still listed as some type of position in Hiawassee, Georgia. So I was wondering if he's still alive.
Well, he is. He is.
Cool.
He's doing fine. He's had some health issues, but he's a couple of years older than me. I'm 71. He's 73. But yeah, he's doing fine. He was employed by a forest resource group. I can't remember it where, and his position with them was to oversee the leased hunting lands, and there was hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres in the Southeast. It was a really good job for him, but maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he stepped away from that. And maybe once a year, they'll call him to do something. I think they had to go out to Texas to handle something, but he knows how to talk when it comes to deer hunting and dealing with people. And so that was a really good fit.
Now, you were his supervisor?
First, we worked as officers together. Then I became his supervisor,
right, which
was challenging. And so Gator Banks, he walks to the beat of his own drummer. Let me tell you. So he's an interesting person. That's why he gets his own chapter in the book. I call it kind of a character sketch. Before he and I have this boat chase with Roger Gunter, the most notorious poacher. Now he's in one boat and I'm in the other. Now I'm not going to give up the ending to it, but it is I think it's an interesting story.
It was because then you were wondering where he was, and also you see him in the back, and he's I'll just say stuck, and we'll leave it at that. But yeah, that's good. And then I read this morning. I felt bad. I was going to run out and get you.
I'm going to get a sip here.
Yeah, that's fine. I should have got you a couple taco supremes, a cinnamon twist, and a Pepsi, but I wasn't able to get that this morning. It was too early. So.
Thank you for because I write about that with the turkey hunting. And I've had some events.
That was the last chapter I got to this morning.
So I've had some events where some of the folks, I've done a lot of talks throughout the state, but some of them would actually bring me in a bag from Taco Bell, which is kind of cute, so just to make it a little more fun.
I was going to grab a Pepsi, I think, in the fridge next door this morning. I forgot to do that, but just for fun. But anyway, to me, I feel like if I was a musician, to be standing in front of an audience and playing a song and watching the people sing my song, I feel like that would be like a biggest honor. But to talk to an author and just like to communicate the book that he wrote, the show that I read, I thought that was kind of cool. To sit down and I would love to sit down with John Grisham. He's my favorite author fictionally. I've not read your book yet, so maybe you'll be my new favorite fiction. No, I haven't sat down with John Grisham. I'd love to do that one day.
Well, no, he's the criminal. He's at the very highest of the high.
Have you read any of his stuff?
I have. I haven't read any recently, but I used to read quite a bit.
You have a favorite book of his that you read?
Oh gosh, it's been so long. I've read quite a few, but I read a lot of books, probably 50, 60 a year at least. So yeah, that's so far back in my memory.
His last 3 are the Camino Island books, and they're all taking place in the Jacksonville area. So just if you're one, I did take
a stab at one of those, but it seems like he had changed his style.
His style was different.
It had become much more of a narrative rather than dialogue.
Right.
And I didn't quite understand why he had done that. I think it was his first Camino book, and I thought that was odd.
He's written a few things. Like
wasn't a lot of dialogue.
He has done some, like he's had for the years the same type of books, and then all of a sudden he came out with like Playing for Pizza or Ford County. So they kind of just a different vibe a little bit.
Right.
But I like the older style books. I've never read Pelican Brief as first. I've seen the movie. So
now I would have read Pelican Brief, but that was so far. And there was a movie came out on that.
But. So I've seen the movie, but I actually never watched the book or read the book. But
we were talking before your show started. We were talking about authors, but my favorite police procedural author is Michael Connelly.
Okay.
And matter of fact, I probably read most of his books going on 3 times. Because I like his style, and of course, his Harry Bosch is now on. I think it's either Netflix or Amazon. That his detective character, and that's a very strong character that he's developed with Harry Bosch. But I like the style of his writing. I've actually studied it quite a bit. When I say studied it, I will look how much time did he spend setting this particular scene up. How much time does Harry Bosch spent at the corners, because I wanted to try to figure out what made his book so popular. And of course, I like him, and a lot of other people. He sold, I think he's going on 62 million books. So he's done something right? And so I try to use some of his techniques in Bones and Water. You won't see a lot of them, but particularly the sentence structure. And I studied that because there's a reason why these guys are good. And I studied nonfiction authors for my first 2 books, particularly Stephen Ranella in the book that he wrote, American Buffalo, which was nonfiction. And I really liked his style, and I thought that we had similar styles. Now, Stephen Ranella has now gone on. He's quite famous. He's got a TV show and he's got a podcast, and his shtick is that he's a hunter and he's an outdoor chef. They kill it, they cook it, and he's written a book on that as well.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
He brought some other stuff with you today too. You brought this box, so I'm curious about this box.
I didn't tell you what it was.
No, you didn't. So I guess I'm about to find out.
Excuse me, I got to clear my throat. Let me have a little more water here.
No problem.
I'm having too much fun. So I wanted to put it up here. Well, wait a minute. Let me turn it around. Well, let me turn it here so you can first see. That's the front.
Okay, so it's either for a bird or a camera.
So I'm turning it around now so the camera can see it. So there is a hole right here. Take a guess.
Well, I was thinking it could be a box that had a camera in it, or it could be a bird box of some sort.
So it's very similar to a bluebird box, but this is a flying squirrel trap. And so it's not a case that I was involved with. This was much later, but this was one of the original traps used by Rodney Knox, who was probably the most infamous poacher in Sumter County down south of us. And Rodney was into the pet trade, legal and illegal, in a very, very large way. He and his loosely knit, if you will, gang of wildlife thieves would go out and they catch everything. Soft-shell turtles, alligator snapping turtles, green tree snakes, green snakes, rattlesnakes, moccasins, whatever he could sell. Very good at it. He was just so in sync with the outdoors. But so he got into flying squirrels, and he had about 10 guys working for him. And they would put thousands of these traps out throughout Florida. Now, flying squirrels here in Florida mainly stay on the high sandy ridges. So we're talking turkey oaks, blackjack oaks. They are nocturnal. They don't fly. They have flaps of skin that from their four legs, if you will, or 4 feet down to their hind feet. And so they glide. Okay. And so at night, they're looking for a nesting area. And so these boxes would be strapped to like a turkey oak. And at night, they'd go in there. There'd be some nesting material. And, well, excuse me, when it comes daylight, they would go in, stay there all day, and then at night, they'd come out. Well, when they go to run the traps, they come in the daytime. They get the trap. They put a plug in it here to keep the flying squirrel from coming out. Then they go back to their truck. Their truck would be a short distance away. And they'd have like a garbage can or some other big cage device. They'd just pull the plug out and kind of empty the squirrels out. Sometimes there'd be 6 or 7 in the box.
They get in through that hole?
Yes. Yeah, they're very tiny. And if you're out at night in the woods, particularly in a high sandy ridge, if you listen real carefully, you can hear them. They make a very tiny squeak sound.
Right,
and if
so flying squirrels are really small.
Very small. They're maybe about like this.
I had no clue.
And they make a very tiny squeak. And if you shine your light up into the tree, you'll see 2 little tiny eyes reflecting back. That's a flying squirrel. So Rodney was catching thousands of these squirrels. So when he had like 1,000, and he'd keep them alive, 1,000 to 2,000, a courier would transport that batch of squirrels from Sumter County to Georgia. Another courier would pick them up and transport them from Georgia to Illinois. From Illinois, they would be flown into South Korea to be sold in the pet trade. At the time he was caught, this was a big operation. It was global. And our undercover guys worked it. I think they worked it with the feds, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. He had made $500,000 off of flying squirrels. He ended up doing 3 years in prison. It's one of the few cases I've known anybody having to go to prison for 3 years. Now, there were some other violations, too, added into this. He had a gator farm, and our investigators suspected that there were alligators there that had come from elsewhere. He was going out and harvesting eggs that he shouldn't be, saying that it was his eggs, that his alligators had laid these eggs. So to solve this problem, they took a group of officers in and spent 3 days. They drained the ponds and they wrestled close to 100 alligators, wrangled them live, and they took a DNA sample. And they proved that some of them did not come from his stock. So there's another thing that we do that most people, and I understand it was a hoot. And when I say wrangled, I'm talking lassoing close to 100. So it was, yeah, there's some serious mud wrestling is what I'm saying.
So let's do this. We'll get to the bottle in a minute. Before we get to that, let's end the conversation of being a warden and all these stories you told.
Yes.
With this, if you don't mind answering this question, why? And I kind of know the answer because I did take hunter safety courses. But why is it important to make sure that people aren't obviously moving eggs and killing deer whenever and turkeys whenever? And why do we have to have an FWC? Like, why is that important?
So you have to have some parameters set for what you can and can't do. If you just allowed folks just with no law, I don't know. We can take speckled perch, for instance. That was a fish they used to catch unlawfully in the hoop nets. If there was no law, you'd have hoop netter. You wouldn't have any speckled perch. They'd all been sold. You can sell them on the market, the black market easily. I mean, but if it was legal to sell them, you wouldn't have any. They'd be all netted out. The gill nets would be everywhere. They'd be netting everything. You could wipe out the large bat if there's no controls. Then you're going to have the species diminish to the point where you might not have any. So, example would be when they did pass the gill net ban in the state of Florida, 1996. I think it was July 1996 it passed. The reason it passed is because the stocks of redfish were diminishing. It was getting less and less and less. And they felt it was because of the gill nets. And then once they basically took the nets away, then the stocks of redfish began to improve. So that's a very kind of a scientific example, if you will. I mean, I'm not a fisheries biologist, but that's one example to offer to you. I mean, another one would be if you have a 2,000-acre tract of land that's out in West Putnam County, and let's just say that the property owner left all his gates open all day, all night. People go in there and wipe the deer out. They would. They gravitate to that. They know where the gates are open. But if you lock those gates, somebody have somebody walk off and drop off and walk in there. But generally, it's going to help protect it. Just that little thing of closing the gate.
Right.
So you got to have some controls.
Yeah, and I understand. Like when I did the FWC, we actually offer that here at our church. They use our buildings every month to do the gun safety training.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Hunter safety.
Well, it's good of you to do that and support us. Yeah.
This room here, we actually do. We have a gentleman that does concealed weapons carry as well. He does a class in here. So, but anyway, but it's important, I think, because it is preserving for our future. And I know people get frustrated with it because we look at environmental. I know there's a lot of crazy environmental stuff out there as well. The EPA and all. Not saying they're wrong, but there has to be a good balance. And
yes,
I try to tell people that, like, well, I don't understand why I can't shoot this. You can't shoot. Like, well, it's, that's just baloney. I'm like, no, it's really not. It's important that we have these rules and regulations to preserve for the next generation.
Well, I mean, I don't want.
Even,
I mean, I know you're a pastor, but I mean, greed does motivate a lot of humans.
Yeah,
and so there's greed with money, but there's also greed with wildlife. If they can make a dime of it, going back to Rodney Knox and the flying squirrels, there was an opening, there was a market, right, and he took advantage of it,
right,
and that market changes. It can be turtles, it could be whatever, particularly soft shell. So I mean, it's
it's
down
for a reason.
Yeah, down in South Florida, they have a serious problem with trapping songbirds because they're selling them as pets. And so
now I wish there was a little lighter restriction on the gopher tortoises. Those things are a pain in the butt.
They can be, but boy, they're serious about their gopher tortoises now.
Oh yeah,
it's a 3rd-degree felony. Yes, they're threatened. Yeah,
they are. Well, hey, so also you write books, you've done talks and stuff, but you also do something with bottles.
Right. So
Tell us about that.
probably about 4 years ago, I took a hard left and I got into, and it has to do with history too, because I'm a kind of a history buff. I'm program coordinator for the Fruitland Peninsula Historical Society. I don't want to drop this. So I'm actually going to take it up and a little bit closer so they can see it. So you mentioned earlier when you first saw this, you thought this was a replica.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's not the first.
Looks like it's new.
Correct. And that's not the first comment I've had on this. I've left a little residue. I'm going to bring it up closer. Well, I'm going to do it right now. I've left a little residue in the bottle. This is actually a dug bottle. This is what's known as a cathedral pickle. And it was found on the home site of a Civil War veteran, John Bland Hazel, up in East Palatka. I had permission to dig there with a buddy of mine. And so that property goes back to before the Civil War. John Bland Hazel was a private and a scout for Confederate Captain John Jackson Dickinson. And so, but anyway, it was late one evening. I'm going along the bank of the river. It's kind of high up. We'd had a couple of good thunderstorms. And I catch a piece of the color out of the side of my eye. It was underneath a 2x6 that had been washed up. And when I first saw it, I thought, it's a new bottle. Well, then when I dug it out and I looked at the base of it, I said, oh my, this is what's known as an iron pommel. And so it's a divot. You can see right there a little bit. So this is where what they call a punty rod was inserted into the base of the bottle while it was red hot. And so part of the glass making process then was to put that rod in there. It would cool a little bit and seal it. This guy would hold the bottle. There's another guy that would come around to apply the neck and the lip after this was blown in a 2-hinge mold. And the other thing is you can see the neck, the hinge mark of the mold stops right here, which means this was applied separately. I don't know if you can see it. You have to get it. The hinge mark stops right there. So there's not even a flea bite in this bottle. It is in perfect condition. So I knew it was a good bottle, and I knew it had to have been made. It wouldn't be any newer than the end of the Civil War, because after the Civil War, they went to a different method.
Okay.
And they stopped using what they call the punty rod. It's called a pommel bottle. But anyway, so I went on the Antique Bottle Forum and I put this up there. And this is where the big boys and girls go to play. They go to the big auction houses in New York to buy bottles. I mean, these people are serious. And they told me that's a cathedral pickle. And then one guy got to looking at the mold pattern. He said the mold pattern is very rare. And they started making offers. And so, but one fella said, if you took this to one of the big 3 auction houses, it would fetch at least $2,000. Okay. Now, there was one amber cathedral pickle of a different design that sold in New York in 2015 for $41,500. So that's
what would they have used the bottle for?
Okay, it's called a pickle bottle, but I might have had something like spiced lobsters, brandied cherries, might have had pickles, something really fancy and exotic, right? And the rest of the bottles we found nearby of this age, the glass is all milky. It's what we call sick glass. The glass was not of a high quality. This is high quality glass. And it's a one-off. It was by itself, and it's insane. I've never found a bottle. I found a lot of bottles. I had to stop digging about a year ago because I got issues with joints. But, I mean, you can even see there's a bubble, and bottle collectors like that imperfection too. So that's an example. That's my best example. And
I lived in Spring Hill. I told you the story before. I lived in Spring Hill and went to this yard sale, and I saw some older bottles, and I was like, so I asked the lady. And of course, whenever you go to a yard sale, people don't want to get rid of their stuff. They're doing it because they feel like they need some money, but then they want to tell you the whole story behind it. And so she gives me this whole story, and I'm like, lady, I just really want to know how much you want for this big, huge black bag of bottles. And so she finally told me she'd take $5 for the whole bag. I thought she was going to tell me like $300 or something, But the story was they came from, I guess, a house that burnt down in Ybor City, which is in Tampa. And they went out there, and I guess they got all these bottles. So I was a youth director at the time. So I come back to church, and some of the teenagers were like, what do you got? I'm like, these are old bottles. They're like, oh. And what do you do with them? I'm like, well, right now I'm trying to clean them out. And they're like, oh, what are you going to do with them after that? So, well, I'm going to probably put them on a shelf and keep them, maybe sell a couple. They're like, oh. So you got a bunch of old bottles with dirt in them. Yeah, that's real cool. And they just walked away, and I was like, you know.
Listen, I think a lot of people think I'm insane, but that's okay.
Well, there's a bunch of, because, in the corner there, I have a whole bunch
I know,
of bottles.
but he's got bottles right there. I'm looking at it. I checked them out
green,
earlier.
blue, white, or clear. So
so good for you.
So I kept a few.
It made my heart beat a little bit when I first walked in and I saw them over there.
A few of those are from that bag from Ybor City. And, of course, I bought a couple of the old Listerine beacon. I have an old Aunt Jemima one in here.
But when you're digging a hole, because we probe these old trash pits out, you have to dig them. It's a lot of work. But when you reach in there and you pull out a bottle that's been there like 130, 140 years, it's kind of feels like a portal to the past. And you get to learn the history of the bottle. It's like you have a milk bottle over there from Tampa, Florida.
Right.
Well, you look that up, you learn a little bit of the history, and I don't know, it's just kind of a neat thing.
The company, the one I have is from a company that closed during the Great Depression. So that bottle was at least that old. So
yes.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So
very
cool.
good. Well, anything you want to ask me real quick? Usually at the end, I always give the person talking something to ask me if they had anything they wanted about.
I don't know that I have anything to ask. I just want to compliment you for doing this and trying to bring out some of the best aspects of Putnam County,
the good,
if you will.
The positive, and the inspirational.
Yeah. So so it's all good, and I think it's uplifting, and I compliment you for that, and I compliment you for, working with FWC and allowing them to have the firearms courses here, and the firearms safety training. I mean, it's great.
Right.
So good on you for doing that, and I hope your podcast does well.
Yeah, it's a hobby. I don't make any money off this. It's just something I do. But I did get a free book out of it this morning.
You did. So
and I can't believe this book.
You got a replacement for the one you dropped in the bathtub.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. God bless.
Yeah.